when the symptoms of COVID just won't go away. COVID long haulers on this episode of Shareable Science Beyond the Blog. Welcome to Shareable Science. Science you can share. The official name is PASC, post-acute sequelae of SARS-CoV-2 infection. That's a mouthful. So we talk about it as long COVID. And individuals that are affected with long COVID are called COVID long haulers. Clinicians are converging around a specific definition of what long COVID is, and that's individuals that have either new or prolonged symptoms that last more than 28 days from their initial onset of the COVID infection. So these are individuals that have symptoms that just continue to hang around, or even new symptoms that develop weeks after their original SARS-CoV-2 infection. Here's a set of the most common symptoms. Not everyone has the same set of symptoms, and that's part of what made this a difficult disorder to really diagnose, because people were not all coming in with the same set of concerns. But you can see many of these actually are things that you would see with a typical COVID infection. And so these symptoms just didn't get better, or they got partially better, but never fully resolved. That also includes things like brain fog, which is the inability to recall details, to find the right word for what you want to say, or a difficult time concentrating. This is not dementia, although for some of these people it feels like that, but it is a completely different thing. So this is what people are affected with. This is how they present. And early on in the course of the pandemic, when these individuals first appeared, they were actually, unfortunately, some of them dismissed out of hand, or told you just need to get more rest, or you just need to be able to get over this. This is all in your head. We recognize this is an authentic component of COVID infections for some individuals. In terms of who gets long COVID, the data are still fuzzy on what the estimate is. I've seen everything from 2% to actually well over 10% of the individuals that get infected are thought to go on to develop long COVID. And we're beginning to get a sense of what potential risk factors are. The first seems to be the severity of the illness. So if you had serious side effects, if you were in the hospital, for example, then it will take you longer to recover. That seems to make sense. But we also see individuals that were asymptomatic, that had no symptoms at the time of their infection and then developed long COVID afterwards, or people that had mild symptoms but then developed more serious symptoms with long COVID. One of the most recent papers, preprints that I've seen, suggests that if you had 5 or more symptoms within your first week of COVID, then that puts you at a higher risk, a higher likelihood of going on to develop long COVID. We also know that increasing age is a risk factor. So older individuals are at a higher risk of developing long COVID, but we also see long COVID in children and in teenagers and young adults. So again, that's not a hard and fast rule. And then we also see that women tend to be more generally impacted by long COVID than men. Many of these individuals do see their symptoms resolve on their own over a period of weeks. But a number of them are still ill 6 months out, or even a year out, and unable to resume full working full-time, or even daily activities like walking around the block or climbing the stairs. So we don't have a good understanding of exactly what causes long COVID, but here are some key theories. One idea is that this is actually the consequence of a low-level ongoing infection. So your body hasn't fully cleared the SARS-CoV-2 virus in certain parts of your tissue. Another is that you've cleared the virus, but the immune response that your body took to defeat the virus was so strong that it's actually caused long-term damage. The inflammatory response has caused long-term damage to your tissues. A third is that the virus actually triggered an autoimmune response, so your body is now turning against its own cells. And then the fourth is that Throughout your life, you were infected with a certain virus like mononucleosis that went dormant. So it continued to live inside your cells but wasn't active. But the SARS-CoV-2 virus and getting COVID-19 reawakened the virus, and now you're dealing with the consequence of a reawakened, previously dormant infection. We don't have clear evidence that any one of these is the key cause, and it might even be something completely different. But this is what the science is beginning to coalesce around. The National Institutes of Health recently set out more than $1 billion in funding to study and better understand long COVID. Let's talk about treatment. There is no one medicine that treats all the issues of COVID-19. So treatment primarily is supportive and symptomatic. So if patients have a certain set of symptoms, maybe it's an irregular heartbeat, there might be medicine to try to help deal with heart palpitations or a racing heart. They're looking at long-term rehab and guided exercise to help people build up their stamina and deal with issues around fatigue. Some people experience a slow and steady improvement with this sort of approach. Other individuals make improvement and then relapse and lose ground. So it is not a consistent course of treatment. And then we also have to be really careful that we recognize that there are a number of emotional and mental health aspects to long COVID, dealing with issues of depression and anxiety around being sick for so many weeks. And we've got to be attuned to that and appropriately prepare to treat that as well. Last topic, what about the vaccine? Does the vaccine make a difference? Should people that have long COVID, can they go on ahead and get vaccinated? Early on, there was a concern that if COVID really was something caused by an immune response, that we didn't necessarily want to give someone a vaccine that triggers an immune response. The data now suggests that that concern doesn't seem to be as much of an issue. In fact, there are some anecdotal stories of individuals with long COVID who got their first dose of the vaccine and got substantially better and their symptoms resolved. A recent preprint has come out with a really small number of patients with long COVID in the United Kingdom that affirms the view that vaccination doesn't seem to make symptoms worse. And there were hints that vaccination might even improve some of the symptoms. This really has to be looked at with a much larger population. So it still remains an unknown question. So that's where we stand right now with a symptom, with a disorder that is really enigmatic, even for something associated with this virus, which is really enigmatic. It is clear that people with long COVID are not making this up. It's not all in their head. They don't need to just get over it. But again, we don't have all the data that we wished we would to be able to be more definitive about cause and specific symptoms and understanding risk factors and treatment. If you know someone that is dealing with long COVID, please send them this video. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you on our next episode of Shareable Science Beyond the Blog.